after seeing how trends were starting to shift within the digital media landscape, I was seeing more writers that were starting publications that were focused on a particular niche. And that's when I said to myself, there's so much talk about what hip hop artists are doing in business, but there's no publication that is dedicated solely to that. I've done all this writing for all these reputable websites and all these reputable publications. What if I leveraged the tools of the internet and did this myself?
Hello, and welcome to the Creator Business Show. My name is Chikati Chima, and I am really excited to be joined today by Dan Runcie. Dan Runcie is the founder and publisher of Trapital. Trapital is a newsletter and a podcast where he looks at the world of deal making by entertainers, musicians, athletes in the world of hip hop. How are people like Timbaland, Pharrell, Serena Williams, Rihanna leveraging their audience, their marketing savvy, and their creativity to do deals on an enormous scale? We also talk about NFTs, we talk about digital communities and DAOs, and we talk about the global influence of hip hop and how that is a business force and how musicians today are actually getting to capitalize and own more of the value that they've been creating for decades. Really fascinating conversation. It's one that taps into my history. I was actually a producer of live shows in Seattle, and I had 2 terrestrial radio shows. So maybe not surprised that I'm doing a podcast in 2021, 2022. But this is a great conversation that I really enjoyed. Very grateful to Dan Runcie, and I think you're going to learn a lot. So join us for today's edition of the Creator Business Show. Dan, welcome to the show. Do you want to give us a quick intro and tell us what you're excited about, what you're working on, and what the future holds?
Yeah, Chikati, first off, thanks for having me. Honored to be here. And yeah, as you mentioned, I'm the founder of Trapital. It's a media company that I started 3 years ago. And my mission and purpose is to elevate hip hop and specifically the business of hip hop and really making sure that we can take this culture to the next level and make sure that the artists that are making business moves in hip hop, the companies that they're starting, they're getting the same level of recognition and analysis and in-depth coverage that you see from companies in finance, companies in tech, and other sectors. I've been a lifelong hip hop fan. I always believed that some of the business moves that hip hop artists have made have been some of the more revolutionary and inspiring ones. But for so long, the coverage on them was just pretty minimal, and it didn't really go in depth the same way that it did with other sectors, as I mentioned. So starting Trapital was an opportunity to elevate that and doing it specifically for the people that are working in this industry, the people that are working in other industries that are partnering with hip hop, especially just given how influential hip hop is, especially over the past few years. Every month or every few weeks, it seems like there's another hip hop artist that's making a big time investment, starting a company, and this was an opportunity to highlight and elevate that, and the content and what I've been able to do and build through that has been great. And I think the recognition has been good too. It's been well received across the industry, been fortunate to have been published and had recognition across many established organizations. And I feel like we're just getting started, still in the early days. And I'm excited that Trapital can grow as hip hop's culture continues to influence not just in the US, but in the world.
Thank you. I have so much to say about that, but how did you decide that this is what you wanted to do? Like, walk us through the process of actually starting Trapital. And then, man, I've got so much to say about, like you said, these major business moves. So yeah, let's talk about all about that. But like, let's talk about you a little bit more and starting Trapital. Like, you said there was a gap. Why did you decide I'm the person to fill this gap? And yeah, just kind of talk us through the genesis.
Yeah, so the journey actually started a few years before I even had the idea for Trapital. So if we go back to 2014, I was in my second year of business school, and a lot of time in business school, we spend breaking down case studies on different companies. And most of these companies are your blue chip companies that are in the Dow Jones or your Fortune 500 companies that have been there for a while. But there was this one case study that came out that year that was on Beyonce's surprise album drop. She released that Beyonce self-titled album in December 2013. And the industry and business world overall had made such a big deal about it because this was one of the most recent times that we had seen an artist drop an album without any notice, without any marketing. And in so many ways, the fact that she didn't do many of the traditional things gave it even more exposure. And I think it was really a turning point in her career. And Harvard Business School, Harvard Business Review specifically, had done a case study that broke down what Beyonce had done, no different than how they've done case studies on the New York Times or Southwest Airlines or many other companies that have been around for years. And I saw how big of an impact that case study had made. It got a bunch of earned media from everywhere. People were buzzing about it. And it stuck out to me for two reasons. One, the case study itself was great. I learned a lot from it and I was inspired by it. But second, it made a big deal because we just didn't see this type of thing often. You didn't see publications like Harvard going deep into artists themselves. And it wasn't just them. It was more broadly, because up to that point, there would be lists on how well people were earning or the amount of money they were making, but nothing was really breaking down the strategy. And that sparked the thought for me to say, there's an opportunity here to go deeper. And there's an opportunity to have more regular content and more regular analysis that's put out into the world that can give these artists the level of insight and analysis and critiques that they deserve. So I'd started writing on my own at that point. Had recently graduated. I'd started a Medium page, and this was just when Medium, I think, was starting to buzz a bit. And I said, you know what? I have some thoughts on the intersections of business and culture, business and music, business and sports, and other areas that interest me. Didn't really do much writing before that, but with all of the work I'd done in the business world and past case study analyses, I felt like I had a pretty good shot. So I was just doing it purely as a hobby. After a few times of doing that, it got picked up by different freelance publications that were like, hey, we'll pay you if you want to put this on our website. So of course, I think the thought there was, okay, well, I was putting this out for free, just sharing it with friends and family on social media. Let's expand this a bit. And that started to grow and snowball to the point where bigger publications and more reputable publications were reaching out, offering more money. And the conversations were getting a bit more interesting. And at this point, I was still working full time, but this opportunity here was growing. And I said, there's could be an opportunity to double down on this. And after seeing how trends were starting to shift within the digital media landscape, I was seeing more writers that were starting publications that were focused on a particular niche. And that's when I said to myself, there's so much talk about what hip hop artists are doing in business, but there's no publication that is dedicated solely to that. I've done all this writing for all these reputable websites and all these reputable publications. What if I leverage the tools of the internet and did this myself?
Well, it seems obvious now, but yeah, Snoop Dogg, Wiz Khalifa, Pharrell, Dr. Dre, Beyonce. I was reading your post about Issa Rae and all of her, she was a real pioneer, not just in the, as a woman, a Black woman, media entrepreneur, but as a social media marketing expert, so I was really liking that breakdown. So yeah, it seems really obvious that would make sense as a publication, but you're the guy. So how are you monetizing? Because this is the Creator Business Show. We want to talk about monetization. So originally you were a freelance contributor, and then you said, I'm going to take this on full time. So can you talk about some of your monetization channels?
Yeah, so I monetize through a few channels. So the primary way is sponsorship. So that's sponsorship revenue that comes by companies that want to sponsor the newsletter I write. I write a weekly newsletter that goes out to nearly 12,000 readers that are executives working in music, media, and entertainment. Then I also have a podcast as well that interviews many of these same leaders. So the sponsorship packages include both of those, and then often can extend to other channels to be able to tap into Trapital's broader audience on social channels as well. And then the second revenue stream is consulting and speaking engagements and being able to work directly with companies that either want my insights on a particular topic, or I can share thoughts on a deal that they might be working on. And although I do some of that, I also as well will do speaking engagements, whether it's a company or a conference that wants me to speak on a particular topic within music, media, entertainment, digital media as well. So those are the main ways that I monetize Trapital.
And what kind of team do you have to support you?
So I'm the sole full-time person, and I have a few folks that help as contractors. So they are helping with the editing and the production of content, both written and with the podcast and the video work as well, and some marketing support with that.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. All right. So let's talk about these deals that folks are making. I just saw, a couple days ago that Snoop Dogg's Casa Verde led a $6.5 million investment into Pistol Data. I was talking to Pistol Data about 6 months ago. At the time, they're talking about raising much less money. So somehow Casa Verde got involved. The deal got much bigger and it happened. So, that's just yesterday or this week. It's just the pace of deal making is so fast and furious. But it's not only that. People like Swizz Beatz. There's so many musicians, so many artists that Kevin Durant, right, is doing a SPAC for the scooter company. I'm sure you're tracking every single one of these. These are just kind of like free flowing through my mind, but it's like the NBA, Andre Iguodala, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry. Then you have entertainers, and you have Serena Williams and Serena Ventures. It's just like, the point that I was going to make is it's not just the frequency, it's the finesse, it's there's a certain je ne sais quoi, about how these moves are being made. So what inspires you, and maybe what trends are you seeing? Floor is yours.
Of course. No, thank you. It's fascinating to see. I know that a friend of mine, Zach O'Malley Greenberg, he wrote this book a couple of years back, put it out right before the pandemic. It's called A-List Angels. And he was talking about this trend that you're saying. So many athletes have gotten more and more involved with investing. And I think that's extended to hip hop artists and entertainers, and more broadly, creators and influencers that we've seen in the past recent years. So a lot of this had happened years back. We can date back to Shaq investing in Google nearly 20 years ago and getting in before its IPO. But decades later, you have someone like Ashton Kutcher that gets more involved, Nas, Jay-Z. All of these folks are tapping into their influence. And I think we're starting to see this expand more and more and more, because now some of the most famous record labels, the hip hop record labels in the music industry, are getting more involved with investing as well. And they're not just thinking about themselves as music, they're trying to leverage their influence and doing the same for their artists. And I think it's great. I think it's smart, because if you are a artist, we've seen so many times when artists have been the ones who either helped a platform grow by bringing their audience on or making it really popular, whether it's someone like a Lil B, who was really big on Twitter when Twitter was just starting to accelerate 10 plus years ago. We saw that as well with what someone like a Lil Nas X was able to do on TikTok, what a DJ Khaled had done on Snapchat years back. We see this time and time again. I think the difference, though, is that now that you're seeing more of these entertainers be able to have equity in some of these platforms that they are going to push themselves, that's where I think the real reward comes in. And that's what excites me and interests me so much, because I think the more and more that we see the Kevin Durants, the Serenas, and the Nas's backing a lot of these companies, it'll make a big difference, because I know they'll put that money to good use.
Yeah, getting exponential returns, where for a lot of folks, just getting a record deal and having a lump sum of money for the first time in their life was pretty extraordinary. But then creating this legacy that a record company owns, and if you don't own your masters, then whoever, I'm not going to name any names here, but like your intellectual property comes out in the 20-year retrospective, the 50-year retrospective, the world tour, and it's like you get nothing for that. So being a marketing leader and being an influencer in the most traditional sense of the word, now all of a sudden having equity means that you get to go along for the whole ride. So that is so cool. So maybe going back to the newsletter, like where are some wins of keeping track of this? And you said you have 12,000 executives. So that must be a very valuable audience. But like, what are some wins you're proud of content that you created, shared with an audience that then turned into deals, turned into relationships, turned into partnerships?
Yeah, I think that for me, there is a few ways I look at content because I have the weekly newsletter that does go out and I'm capturing the latest moves that are happening. And that is my thoughts to be able to keep people up to date. So I know that part of the promise and opportunity of Trapital is making sure that you can stay ahead of the latest trends. And things are just moving so fast that it's valuable to be able to offer that and giving insight more than just a headline, but knowing that based on how I'm seeing things and based on where things are, I can provide enough so that this can be the 5 to 10 minute read that an executive can look at or a founder can look at and say, okay, thanks, I have a understanding. And sometimes they may agree with what I'm saying, sometimes they may disagree with what I'm saying, but even if they disagree, it helps reinforce how they might view things. So I definitely see the value in that piece of it. I think though, taking that a step further with how I look at the other side of content, which are the essays that I write. And those are the ones that I hope, and I write them in a way where they can be lasting, evergreen pieces that people can go back and back to and that can hold the weight that they have. So, for instance, you mentioned the Issa Rae essay that I had written, and that was an essay I written almost a year and a half ago at this point. I believe that was spring 2020. And since putting that out, I think that served as a reference point for a lot of people that see what the mogul playbook can look like and how they might want to position themselves. It's also opened up relationships and connections with some of the folks that work with Issa Rae directly and being able to have those conversations. And, I think more of an informal perspective, having those back door conversations and say, okay, did I get this part right? Was this part off? And then getting their takes there. But more broadly, being able to have further conversations about other breakdowns. For instance, I had written an essay about Will and Jada Pinkett Smith and how they've built up Westbrook Inc. And that had inspired some streaming services that have reached out and said, hey, we're getting more into the creator economy, and how you broke down what Will Smith and Jada are doing is insightful for how we're looking at building things. And if they're seeing that now, I think that's going to continue to be relevant, especially as the creator economy continues to expand. So those lead to speaking opportunities, those lead to consulting opportunities, and those lead to deeper partnerships and further expansions that I may have for Trapital down the road. I think it just increases the ability to make moves in a thoughtful and strategic way.
Mm-hmm. It's all about making moves. I mean, it's just like when you say making moves, it's just kind of something that people say casually, but you're really the thought leader when it comes to like, what is the dollar value of making moves look like in this world? It's just so fascinating to me. We're all like globally, we're so influenced by hip hop. I'm liking, behind you, people who are listening to this can't see, but behind your right shoulder, you got a world map, and it's like hip hop really is the most powerful creative force that connects people all across the world.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting you say that because I've often had the conversation with people about what is the most influential cultural force in the world. And some folks say hip hop, some folks say Hollywood and just entertainment more broadly. I think the difference, though, and this is why I often go back to hip hop, is that because this is a culture that expands mediums, I think primarily it's audio, and given audio just can travel and I think is going to be a bit easier to transfer, whether it's someone identifying with the Jay-Z, Beyonce, or Drake song, that can hit folks everywhere across the world, regardless of socioeconomic backgrounds or what opportunities look like from a business perspective there. Versus if you look at some of the biggest movies that may exist, I think movies or TV shows, sometimes those can be a bit harder to translate internationally in all of those same type of areas. And I think we've seen it with hip hop, whether you see the influence that some of these artists have, you go around the world, you see them chant their names and stuff like that. And I don't know if that necessarily exists in the same way for all of the biggest movie stars, especially some of the US centric ones. So that's why I do think that hip hop's force there, because it's not just the audio. As I mentioned, the audio is paramount first, but it's the fashion. It's what we're seeing now in gaming. It's how people speak. It's how people dress and act and the vibe that they have and the influence that it comes from. And that is a culture that I think expands beyond the mediums itself. So that's why I often go back and remind folks that, yes, it's hip hop that is the most influential cultural force in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's the attitude, just like you said. It's a way of appearing and showing up in life that is, even if you don't necessarily identify with the foundational events that created hip hop, there's a certain, I don't want to sound cheesy here because we're talking to a very broad audience, but it's like, there's a certain rejection of convention wherever, if you're in Poland, if you're in Argentina, that's like that hip hop stands the test of time.
Exactly.
I do have a question for you for, Trapital. One of the things that we're seeing in hip hop, which I love personally, is that now Nigerian artists, Ghanaian artists, to an extent, with Amapiano in South Africa, that's now coming back and influencing hip hop in the United States. Are you seeing any deals, any of the kind of Trapital activity with Nigerian artists, African artists starting to invest in startups, either in Africa or US and Europe?
So that's something that I do want to track more specifically on what the artists, not just outside of the US, but especially West African artists in Ghana, Nigeria, and how they're getting tapped in, because I'm sure the biggest names are probably getting themselves in something, whether it's someone like a WizKid. But beyond that, you just look at how their style and how their voice and influence has influenced what some of the biggest artists here have done. Like you look at Drake's album, Views. I don't know if Views comes out the same way if Drake isn't inspired by what he's hearing in Afrobeats or what he's hearing from West African artists. So when you think about that and you think about the influence Drake has and how he is now someone that's actively investing in all sorts of companies, whether we're seeing him invest in media, we're seeing him invest in food companies, I would love to see the same thing happening for the Nigerian artist and Ghanaian artist. And to be clear, a lot of this may be happening. It's something that I do want to track more specifically myself. But yeah, I feel like that opportunity in itself is still something that I think is only going to continue to grow.
Yeah. Well, if there's anyone who's probably doing this as a starting place would be Peter P. Square, because I follow him on Instagram. I don't follow him as closely, but that guy is involved in all kinds of stuff. And I think he's living in London primarily. Yeah, as the first stepping stone into that journey, he might be someone to point to more. But I mean, yeah, it's just like, again, we're talking about the speed of hip hop and the speed of culture. It just stands to reason that if you're a Nigerian artist, and there's crazy startup deals happening right now every single day in Nigeria and Ghana and South Africa and Ethiopia and Kenya, what have you, either sweat equity or putting in a little money to blow up a social app or a fintech app. It just makes sense. So what else excites you right now?
Oh, I mean, I am fascinated to see what's been happening right now with opportunities in Web3 and specifically in music, because I know that there's a bunch of excitement that's happening right now with everyone trying to understand the metaverse. I think some of these things were trending, but ever since Facebook changed its name, the floodgates have truly opened up. And for artists, especially this past year, we've seen more platforms that allow artists to sell NFTs, whether it's a marketplace or just something that facilitates payments or connections with fans. We're seeing other platforms that enable artists to launch their own tokens and then creating unique experiences and leveraging what's available through the blockchain technology. And I think we're also seeing what artists themselves can look at in terms of business models in virtual worlds and how they can take things up. Because I think that we're still in the early days, but where I think we'll get to eventually is that making sure that people realize that, yes, Web3 is an exciting time with everything happening, but that in itself is not a business model. You still want to have something that people are going to want to buy. People are going to want to buy time and time again, and that adds value, whether that's value in real life or value to them in the metaverse or to their avatars in the metaverse. And I think there is great opportunity to do that, just given how influential artists are. And if they continue, especially hip hop artists, if they continue to be on the forefront of so many technology trends, as we've seen time and time again, whether it's ringtones or streaming or other things, it's always the hip hop artists or social media as well. It's always the hip hop artists that lean in to these things. So I'm excited to see how they take advantage of these opportunities. And listen, not everything is going to work. I think even in the past year, we've seen some successful NFT projects. We've seen some unsuccessful NFT projects. We've seen some where the numbers have been questionable, but we also seen others that it's quite promising. And once we are able to go through that phase, different than anything else, we will see a lot of great business opportunities emerge. And I hope that artists don't only get to lead the forefront, but given the opportunities now, they get upside and they get more of a stake in the things that they are building or in the companies that they are help growing by lending their platform to those companies to help with their customer acquisition and other growth goals.
What do you think is working in NFTs for music and creators, and where do you think we still need to make improvements?
What I think is working is the artists who already have a fan base that supports them directly and has already been engaging with that. Because, like anything, I think there is a good amount of friction, at least right now, with opportunities in more broadly blockchain related opportunities. So, if you are an artist and you're trying to launch something, if you already have artists, if you already have a fan base that's, for lack of a better word, used to jumping through a few, holes or going through a few challenges to get your products or to get the latest thing you have, or they already buy limited editions of what you have. Like, for instance, there's the hip hop collective out of Buffalo, Griselda, the three of those rappers there, they have done quite well selling high-end vinyls and high-end merchandise that is unique to their fan base. If they were able to take that excitement onto something like NFTs, I think it could work quite well, just given the fan base that they have. They're mostly reaching an older hip hop audience relative to a lot of the 20-something-year-old rappers. These guys are all in their late 30s, some of them maybe even their early 40s. I need to double check their age, but be able to tap into that, I think they would serve up quite well. I think on the flip side, though, the challenge and what we see from the things that don't work are the artists that are just launching something on the blockchain or just launching a NFT project for the sake of it. And I think we've seen some major label artists outside of hip hop launch projects and they got a good amount of headlines, but when you actually talk to people behind the scenes, they didn't sell as well. And that's because they never necessarily had a fan base that looked at them for that. These are people that were backed and I think largely supported by the majors. And as helpful as that can be, if you aren't currently at, the top of the game, then it's hard to leverage the fan base the same way effectively that a independent artist that, even though they may have a smaller base, everyone that is rocking with them is with them. Mm-hmm. So when you have this more unique thing like an NFT and some of these major artists, it isn't going to quite work unless there is a true value prop. How does this add value? What is the thing that you're solving? You can't just put any old album you have up and throw a high dollar amount on it and expect it to happen. I think another person we could talk about on the plus side of this is Nipsey Hussle. This is an example I've often talked about. The late rapper had launched a $100 mixtape 8 years ago. He was ridiculed for it, but it lined up with everything he had done as an independent artist and it succeeded. Then he followed up with a $1,000 mixtape and a few years later. And if he had been alive for what we're seeing now with NFTs, that would have been right up his alley. This is literally the type of thing that he was building towards. So I think eventually we may get to a point where it can work for every artist, but in the early days, just with the amount of friction, just with the amount of opportunities that are there, the artists that already have a fan base that's bought in will be most successful on that front.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is if they're not checking for you for these types of drops in frequency, then they're not all of a sudden going to set up a crypto wallet, fund it, and then buy your album as an NFT just because you have, like as a publicist, sure, I can sell that, but people aren't going to buy it.
Exactly. And especially if you look at how drop culture works in other areas of merch and other areas of retail, a company like Supreme, it took years for them to get to the point where people are going to line up outside of their stores for some unique high priced item. You look at something like Yeezy, it took years until Yeezy could sell the mass market sneakers and sell $1 million, or not $1 million, $1 million worth of sneakers in a drop. That takes time to get there. And that's what I mean by the fan bases and the customers that are bought into that. If you just go launch that, it's not necessarily going to work. So some of those economics and the scarcity and the rarity of leading into that hype beast culture, I think also translates well with what can work effectively with NFTs.
But you have to invest in the relationship with your community. You have to really have a community. And, I was talking to a really good friend of mine on one of the recent podcasts, DJ Complexion, and he has the Future Beats show, and he just got picked up for a show on the BBC. And, he has a really engaged community. I was telling him, like, people would buy your NFTs. I was wearing the shirt. They did a merchandise drop, but, based on the complications of life, it's not easy to do a merchandise drop very often. But I would have bought multiple of the shirts if they were even available, and they sold out really quickly. But if he had NFTs, if he decides to do that, I've been listening to his radio show for at least 8 years. I would 100% figure out a way to do it. I mean, if I wasn't more knowledgeable, like I'm pretty knowledgeable in crypto and blockchain, but if I wasn't, and he was putting up an NFT, I would buy it. But that's because I have an 8-year history with him.
Right. You're bought in, you understand what he's about, you want to, part of it is the support, but part of it's also the value that you expect to get. And I think that's so key with all this stuff, right? You can't just spark up and expect these things to succeed. This is why so many people talk about building audience first products. If you have the fan base and you have the folks that are built in, like you said, you're following this creator that has been, or rather you've been following for the past 8 years. Yeah, that's just going to make you more likely. I mean, that doesn't mean you're going to buy everything they drop, but it increases your willingness to pay.
But if it's scarce, then someone's going to buy it, right? And
true.
What's really interesting about DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, is that when you buy in, you are contributing to a community. And so there's some of these NFT projects, Bored Ape Yacht Club, Crypto Punks, et cetera. But specifically, the Bored Ape Yacht Club, they're saying if you buy this, then you get entry to shows, social events, and things that other people cannot because they don't own it. You can't counterfeit an NFT. And so there's this identity. There's both the physical, or not the physical, but the visual identity of having a Bored Ape. And then there's the community participation, which is really fascinating. But that goes back to your earlier point, is like, if you don't have community, if you don't have audience, if you don't have some kind of invested, me as an audience, if I haven't invested in the project in the first place, then there's not going to be any sustainable value of just putting something up on the blockchain.
Right. And I think with that too, looking at Bored Ape Yacht Club, they have recently had 2 new music initiatives that have come out in recent weeks. One of them is Universal Music Group had announced this new group called Kingship, and it is a collection of characters from the Bored Ape Yacht Club. And we've now seen Timbaland do the same thing. He has this new company called Ape In Productions, and he launched this new group called The Zoo. And he also has a group of characters from the Bored Ape Yacht Club. And just like you said, it's going to give them access to all of the unique fan experiences if a fan is able to buy a token. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because obviously we're talking brand new things where there is a certain community of folks that have risen and driven the value of Bored Ape Yacht Club to have exploded the way that it has in 2021. How does that translate to the people who will be listening to that music and the people that will be supporting it from that perspective? That's still to be determined, right? Because I feel like there's a bit of a mix there where people, of course, are buying in for the status symbol. And in many ways, owning a Bored Ape Yacht Club is a signal that you are someone that is ahead of the curve with regards to Web3 and NFTs and other rare things that are available. However, what will that look like for a group that in a lot of ways would be managed the same way that a record label is? And of course, or not necessarily the same way that a record label is, or a group managed the same way that a record label would manage any other group.
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to find the fan base. Is that music going to resonate with the current people that are buying it? How do you then tap into a new audience? And I think these things can happen, but that's what I'm going to be following a bit, because it's fascinating and things are just changing so much. But I do think there's potential there.
Maybe you followed this. I can't remember the name right now, but she did a fractional album. So there's fractional ownership of the album. There was only one album made as an NFT, but instead of, I own the album, opening it up to the community so that thousands of people could contribute $5, $20, $50, and then own a share of the profits of the album as one NFT as opposed to 10,000 album copies. And that was a really fascinating way to tap into the community.
Interesting. Yeah, I heard about something like that. And the name is escaping me because I do remember seeing this. But yeah, I think that just shows how flexible these things can be, right? Because if you do have a DAO, you can empower them to do, crazy, unique things. Right now, we're seeing a DAO get together to try to buy a copy of the US Constitution. It's going to be very fascinating to see what that can lead to. And I think in a lot of ways, that serves as both a signal for what can be possible. A month earlier, we saw a DAO buy a rare, not even a rare, the single version of Wu-Tang's album,
that's right. Yeah.
Once Upon a Time in Shaolin. And of course, it was owned by the government before, and there was another person that had owned it, and there was some criminal behavior there that had led to that. But I think it's fascinating to see what will happen now that that group, the DAO, is owning this. And there's kind of a interesting comparison there because on one hand, I've often told people that in many ways, Wu-Tang Clan is one of the original DAOs. If you want to look at this decentralized autonomous organization where you have each of these rappers doing their distinct things, but they do come together for one of the most classic albums of the 90s and all of music. And with everything else they've continued to do after that and the influence that they've had. And then them, when they launched this album and released it, this album in a lot of ways was a response to them feeling like streaming had devalued their music. That's why they had worked on this project and they wanted to sell one copy. And that was their way to look back and say, hey, in the Renaissance, this is how we valued art. We want to do the same thing. So it's admirable to see how they do that. And obviously it being purchased by a DAO that, who knows, maybe they will take it and sell it as a NFT that involves some type of fractional ownership. Maybe they will have several NFTs that are selling particular parts of it. It is a full circle moment. And I think it'll be cool to see how more of that stuff plays out too.
Absolutely. I was talking to my good friend Larry last night. Shout out, Larry, if you're listening, about how, we traded baseball cards. And then, when I was probably either transitioning from elementary to middle school, there was when Tamagotchis came out. It's like, oh, a virtual pet, and then Pokemon cards and things like that. It's like, we got it. We understood. Maybe it's not Renaissance high art, but it certainly is understandable. And so for those of us who grew up with these kind of ideas of what culture is, collecting NFTs, the value associated with it, that all makes perfect sense. So there's hundreds of millions of people alive today. I would even venture to say billions of people who it's not a foreign concept. The technology, you don't necessarily have to understand how all of the technology works just to get that, hey, this is how culture is being shared. This is how communication, this is how communities are being formed.
Exactly. And that's why it's ironic. One of the common pushbacks that you'll hear from people that may criticize NFTs is that, oh, well, I can just hit right click save. I can just do this and put this as my avatar, my social media photo. And it's like, yeah, you could do that. No different than you could buy a Topps or Upper Deck trading card of Ken Griffey Jr. and make your own cardboard copy of that and get it printed on some glossy thing and make it look identical. You can do that too. That doesn't mean it's real. So much of that, I think, still stays with us. We knew what it was like to collect rare things. You mentioned Tamagotchis. It makes me also think of Pokemon, when Pokemon had really blown up and there was someone that had the specific version of the game that you had to try to trade with in order to collect all 150 Pokemon. The way they did that, I think, was masterful in a lot of ways because it just incentivized the purchase. It made it have this collective way of playing with each other in a way that just didn't exist, especially with the handheld Game Boy toy. And you see that continue to expand. So many of these things I think are ingrained. I think Beanie Babies is another aspect of this, right? How many, rare copies of the Princess Diana Beanie Baby or some of these other ones that were quite unique at the time. This is just the digital and metaverse version of these things. And we're going to continue to see more of that.
You just reminded me, actually, I have a Ken Griffey Jr. chocolate bar from his rookie season. And maybe the third pack of baseball cards I ever bought in my life, I got a Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card. It was a Fleer
nice
rookie.
You still got it?
I might have traded it for a Randy Johnson card.
Okay. I mean, they were both Mariners at the time. So,
I think this was actually when he was on the Expos. So
okay.
Even earlier. But yeah, there's the value of things really is in people's belief. And tying it back to Trapital, it's like people believe in entertainers, musicians, athletes because they see them doing these incredible things. So just that shining humanity creates value in and of itself. If you can't convert it into, oh, this is dollars, it's just like there's that human emotion. Like you can't put any price tag on human emotion because it's the most irrational thing, but the world moves based on emotion.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think even something, one of the bigger hip hop events that had happened this year, you look at Kanye West and the listening parties that he had hosted across the country in different cities. No previous music that was released, and there was no promise even that he was going to release new music. And you saw him sell so many tickets and merchandise and sell out full on football stadiums worth of people to do that. That was a huge display of power. And I think that a lot of ways is why he has had the success with Yeezy and other things. That said, this is something I've talked about a lot, is that being a big name celebrity or entertainer, in many ways, it can get you the access and it can get you in the door. But if you want to build something sustainable, you still need to have a sound business around it. You still need to be adding value in some unique way. And most of the biggest and most influential artists out there that are now succeeding in business have had some early challenges or failures before they got there. It takes time, no different than a second time or a third time founder being much more likely to succeed given the things that they learned the first time around. And there is, I think, a humility that comes with that, but also grounds us in the hard work that's required to get these things off the ground.
And so when you're cataloging the moves being made by these folks, do you call them Trapitalists or, like Serena Williams or, Pharrell or anyone, or do you have a name for them broadly?
So I don't have a name for them broadly in terms of the folks making these moves. It's funny. I did in the past, I have used that term referring to folks that are either reading or subscribed to Trapital content, but not for the folks that are actually making investments. I've definitely done that more so, tracking the people who are making the big moves. And I do think that there could be a place to release some of that information, but doing it in a way that I think is unique. I mean, I think there are other publications that do their annual lists or their net worth lists and stuff like that. So if I was to have something out there, I think having, the unique branding would be effective, but wanting to do it in a way that I think is true and ties back to what Trapital is all about.
Yeah. Well, Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income, just multi-SKU creator. One of the things he says about building communities, when you give the community a name, then they feel connected to one another. And that, again, just goes to DAOs and NFTs. Is like, okay, well, we're the Bored Apes. So all of a sudden, just having a name to refer to yourself creates value and creates connection. But, going back to Trapital, who's making the best moves right now? In 2021, who have you been most impressed with in terms of their deal-making ability, the creativity brought to bear, and the return on investment?
I think that the person that I think about a lot when I think about 2021 is Rihanna. I think that we've seen some success. I think we've seen some challenges, but I think we've continued to see things rise up. Specifically with the success, she saw how successful both Fenty Beauty and Savage Fenty were. She was able to get an additional investment from Goldman Sachs to help boost it further, and really leaning into the media to help expand that. And that's why it wasn't a surprise when it came out that she had both billion-dollar brands, own equity in both of them. And therefore, she herself was now a billionaire and continuing to rise up that rank. And that's just fascinating, especially when you look back to where she was 10 plus years ago, nearly bankrupt due to a shady accountant, but she was releasing albums year after year after year. Now we're in this position where we're almost coming up on 6 years since she had released her last album, but her business career and success has just taken off since then. So it has been this interesting switch. And I think especially this past year, granted, she did have some hiccups there because last year she had launched a Maison under LVMH. and that's a Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy. And with them, she wanted to launch a fashion brand, and the fashion brand was named Fenty. It didn't end up clicking, and they eventually decided to pause the Maison. And I think there's a number of reasons why it didn't work. It didn't necessarily have that same affordable inclusivity identity that had worked so well for Fenty Beauty and for Savage Fenty. So I think when you look at her and everything that she's been able to do and still, take that as, a small L, but still continue to grow these bigger and bigger brands and leverage her influence. That's what it's all about. And especially just given the career trajectory as well, she's the person that I look back on as 2021 being like, yeah, this was a big year for her.
Yeah. And that's amazing. I mean, Kim Kardashian coming a billion, maybe it was 2020, but on the one hand, I'm aging myself here, but it's like on the one hand, getting to $1 billion is so phenomenal. And then on the other hand, when you look at how big the economy is and how influential hip hop and entertainment is, it's like, well, billion is your due if you have that much sway over global culture. It's fascinating. It's like, that's really, who's going to be the first, or maybe there already is a $10 billion entertainer. Like Kanye West is multi-billions, and Jay-Z and Beyonce between them are multiple billions as well. And then the value of entertainment that they've created is almost hard to calculate.
Yeah, I think that we'll see it eventually. It's going to happen. And, I know that sometimes these numbers can be a bit hard to nail down specifically. I know that Forbes and other outlets do what they can from a due diligence perspective. But at the end of the day, it is just so hard to get an accurate and public picture, especially given the power that it can have and given the desires that a entertainer may have to make sure that their net worth is either in some cases higher than it may actually be because they want to present it that way, or in some cases lower as well. And I think, Kanye's challenges with the companies that have reported on his net worth have been widely reported. And I think that's another case of those, right? But that said, if these entertainers are able to get the level of buy-in and influence, and not just get the buy-in and influence, because I think they have the influence, if they're able to monetize that influence further, it can be quite powerful. Kanye had recently done an interview on Drink Champs, and one of the things he talked about in so many words was, yes, I may be a billionaire now, but you think of how many like tens or even hundreds of billions that I may have made Def Jam or Adidas or potentially Gap looking at these deals. That is very real. And I think every artist has their version of that. I know Cardi B has said similar, where she may be getting, a $5 million bag, but she wants to know, okay, what does that overall bag look like? How can they get more in that? And I think the more that we talk about these things, the more that I think these companies are naturally going to lend their influence, or not necessarily lend their influence, but lend more equity and opportunity to these artists that really make these platforms what they are.
Yeah.
And I think the more that we'll see that, we'll see more artists getting into that $10 billion or plus and really getting into that space of wealth generation.
Yeah. It's we've been talking about NFTs a lot, but one of the really interesting things about programming an NFT is that you can actually keep a royalty. So anytime it trades hands, you then, as the artist and creator, get something. So
right.
Again, to that question of, I might have gotten $5 million or $7 million, or I might have $1 billion, not me, but I might have $1 billion or generated $1 billion for myself. But how many billions of dollars has my work created for,
True.
Big sneaker manufacturers and record companies and just that influence. And then also, I was just thinking, like, if you capitalize it, so it's like if you're Adidas and all of a sudden your deal with Kanye West generates multiple $1 billion, then you can go issue a bond, or you can go take out a loan against that and make more money. So it's not just the initial value of the dollar, but it's like the having liquidity and what that does.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. So are you using Pico?
I am. Yeah. So I am using Pico primarily for email sign on and being able to have people when they sign up, they can go into the email funnel that it enables. And yeah, I've enjoyed the tool. I think it's been great to work as well with some of the folks on leadership and gotten to know them and really behind what they're trying to build. I think that there are a lot of business models and there are a lot of ways that creators are making money. But I think what Pico does well is that you're able to have everything on one particular platform, and a lot of it can integrate and work nicely with a lot of the other things in the stack for a someone especially who's writing a newsletter or has a podcast like I do. Right, there's so many interchangeable parts, you're trying to get them together, but how can you bring it together? So that's one thing that I think Pico does a good job of.
And what are your, what is your audience asking for more of? Because that's, one of the things I think that is really fascinating about Pico is like, hey, know your audience, right? So based on that, what are you hearing? What kind of engagement is your audience giving you that says, hey, this is the next thing?
Yeah. So I think the audience wants a few things, right? The audience wants even more of the deep dives. They want to read more of those profiles. And I think that's one of those things where you create them as much as you can, but you want to make sure that there's a balance, right? Because I want to make sure the quality is high. I want to make sure these can be evergreen stories and breakdowns that can stay there and not just benefit the business overall, but can continue to add value for people. So they want more of those. Same thing with the podcast interviews. I've been fortunate to have great guests that are leaders in this space that are building, and many of the same people that I've written about before or done breakdowns on have come on the podcast, and we've gone in more depth about what they're doing, and we can have a different type of conversation that they likely wouldn't have on another platform. So that's an opportunity to do that. And I think they also want to see where can they continue to learn from Trapital or continue to build with Trapital in a more, not just thoughtful, but in a more deep way. What does that look like on an education side? What does that look like, especially given the investments and other business deals I'm tracking? What does it look like from that perspective? There's a lot of opportunity there. So the more that, not just necessarily going into everything, because no different than the folks I cover, you still need to be strategic and pick your moments when you're building something out. But knowing that I can be flexible and lean into things when the timing is right. So that's what I like most. It's no different than how I break down the artists themselves. It's not that there's necessarily right answers, because this is strategy at the end of the day. There's trade-offs. There could be business and non-business related decisions to make a move in a particular area, but there is a reward for for the speed that you can execute something on, and the nimbleness of being able to do it thoughtfully and in a way that makes sense. And the more that I can continue to do that, I think the more successful Trapital will continue to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in 2022, what are you excited about for Trapital?
Yeah. So for me, it's continuing to build out the content. I'm grateful for what I've been able to put out there, but I want to be able to do more. I want to be able to put out more deep dives. And I think a lot of that comes with being able to leverage help in particular areas to make things even stronger, whether that's from a packaging perspective or being able to use more diagrams or visuals. I still think that that is a space where I can continue to build and develop from that perspective. I also know that from a podcast perspective, I want to be able to have the people who are taking this culture to the next level. I've been grateful for the great guests that I've had, and I want to continue to build on that and be flexible with that too. And I think whatever the future lies ahead for me, whether it is something that could be revolved in education, something that could be involved in investing, being able to take those opportunities where they come, that's what excites me the most. And, I think more than anything, with those and knowing that each of those things does take time, be able to expand things when the time is right. I see this as opportunity to build, I think, not just a nimble, but a smartly run company where I can leverage my best skill sets. I can outsource the things that may not necessarily make sense, but I think we've seen, not just in the people I cover, how influential it can be when people follow a particular identity or a particular personality. So me being able to do that myself, knowing that as much as people enjoy reading Trapital, they also want to know, okay, I wonder what Dan thinks about this. I wonder what Dan thinks about that. So my ability to deliver that on a quality level and just tapping into the other ways that the audience is trying to grow and take advantage of the opportunity, that's where the sweet spot is for me. So yeah, that'll be, I think, a big focus. I mean, that'll be the primary focus for me in 2022.
Nice, nice. Oh, I'll ask you one final question, but what is your non-obvious connections are always so fascinating. What's a non-obvious connection or a non-obvious deal maker, non-obvious creator that really blew you away in 2021?
A non-obvious creator. Let's see. So I'm thinking of someone that may have done a really good job with something that people may not have necessarily thought.
They came out of left field, but then when they showed up, they're like, oh, okay, he's passed, but ASAP Yams, he was like the kind of business guy for ASAP Mob. So if he had done something big, it'd be like, well, he's always been there with these guys, But is there an ASAP Yams of 2021 that really surprised you?
Yeah, I'll say that one person that I wouldn't say this person necessarily surprised me, but because I've been following what they're doing, but one person that I do think got a bit more recognition in 2021 was NBA YoungBoy. And he's a rapper from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And he's someone who has dominated YouTube and has really doubled down in one medium. And I think what's fascinating about what he's done is that he actually showed up in the top 10. I think Billboard had this top 10 on the artists that had made the most money combined with recorded revenue and touring in the past year. And of course, a lot of those results were heavily skewed because there just wasn't as much touring given the pandemic and shutdowns of the past year. But even with that said, if you are showing up on the top 10 of that list and you're not necessarily someone that is a household name or like that, that is pretty remarkable. And I think he's continued to grow and develop there, and how he's been able to, in many ways, create this engine of YouTube content where he's dropping videos all the time, dropping music all the time. And he's staying within his lane of just putting this content out there. And I think in some ways, one of the reasons he's probably stayed and been as successful as he has been on YouTube is because he may have had challenges getting deals elsewhere, because he's definitely had some legal issues and some problematic transgressions with some of his run-ins with the law. But that, I think we've also seen, is why YouTube has been a home for a lot of these people, because the platform can be much more lenient on those things, and you don't necessarily rely on major distributors to make that happen. And I think we're likely going to continue to see that grow. And in some ways, I think he has more in common with how he runs his business with other YouTubers than he might with a lot of other rappers. And I think that's fascinating, because I think as artists really double down and get known for different platforms, we're going to see more and more of that. So wouldn't quite say he came out of left field, but I think that's one person that, given their spot on that list, a lot of people were like, oh, wow, that's definitely, worthy of acknowledgement.
And that's just emblematic of this completely new paradigm we're operating in, where, YouTube sensation to Billboard top 10. If you're on the Billboard list, that means that you are doing something at a big, big level.
Right.
So
definitely.
Well, that's fantastic. Fantastic. I mean, I could have this conversation for quite a while. I imagine that running a media shop, you don't have forever to talk. So I'll let you go. And we'll stay in touch, because this is just so fascinating. I had a long ago, like 2003, I had 2 terrestrial radio shows doing hip hop music in the Seattle area. And I was actually a music producer, or a live show producer, back in like 2003, 2004. And so I knew then the potential and just the global reach. And when CD Baby was a thing, I used to reach out to musicians all across the world and be like, hey, send your CDs to our radio station. I'll play you on the air. MySpace was doing its thing, but I wasn't really checking on MySpace for music. And then 1 year later, wow, I was already in New York at that point. Yeah. So I've been following this for a long time. So, it's just so awesome to see that Trapital needed to exist and you're doing it.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. That's really cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Didn't know that, but yeah, that's why I'm here.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us today on the Creator Business Show. I really enjoyed talking with you about, creator-led projects and communities, and how DAOs are really bringing forward behaviors that we are used to in the past, collectibles and that excitement and emotion. We talked also about, the billion-dollar valuations that some of these creators are getting for their body of work and their life. And, we're going to see more of it. Before we let you go, how can people get in touch with you? Who would you like to hear from?
Yeah, so if you heard this and this resonated with you, especially if you are interested in hip hop, you work in the music industry, or even if you work outside the music industry, I think we've seen many brands and other companies and even just people that are hip hop fans really get a lot of value out of this. And that has made me feel secure in the work that I've been doing. So if you are interested, go to trapital.co and sign up for the newsletter. That's trapital.co. You can sign up for the newsletter. And if you're listening to this, you probably listen to podcasts as well. So search Trapital on whatever podcast feed you're listening to, and you'll see the weekly episodes that I put out each week with business leaders who work in music, media, and entertainment and more.
Again, it's trapital.co for the newsletter. Sign up for that. The Trapital podcast, wherever podcasts can be accessed. Dan, thank you so much. We wish you a really abundant 2022. I look forward to staying in touch. And again, thank you for joining us on the Creator Business Show today.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me.